Hello and welcome to my next share sit with my special guest, Marisa Nelson. She's actually my boss. Some of you know I'm a paralegal, so I work with her. She's a wills and trust attorney. So we're going to talk a little bit about her and how she got into law and what services she offers while we're sipping on some Prosecco, and it's La Gioiosa, and I'll show you a little closer. This is from the Prosecco DOC. All right, so let's cheers.
Cheers.
All right, so let's talk about like how you got into law. Like, did you know you wanted to become a lawyer when you're young and all that fun stuff?
All right. I decided to apply to law school about 6 months before I did.
Okay.
So no, I had no idea. I was about to graduate with my undergrad degree from San Obispo, and with a degree in languages. Spanish mostly. So wasn't sure what I was going to do with that. And a friend mentioned law school, and I realized that not all lawyers do like TV lawyering, and it became much more of an option. So yeah. Then about 6 months, I decided I wanted to go. Applied, took the LSAT, and 6 months after that, I was in law school. So,
What law school did you go to?
University of San Francisco.
Okay. And then how did you end up in wills and trusts?
Let's see. So after undergrad, I mostly realized that I just needed to keep an open mind and not be too set on what I thought I wanted to do going into it, because it turns out I'm not an engineer, which is what I started out in undergrad. So I took a whole bunch of classes and ended up really enjoying tax law of all things, and took every tax law class that I could. One of the last of which was a gift and estate tax law class. Really fun professor who flew in to teach the class and brought us food all the time, which didn't hurt. Yeah, so from there I started volunteering in the local probate court and saw kind of everything that goes wrong with no planning or bad planning, and was really drawn to the idea of like how a little bit of planning, a goodwill and trust, can avoid like so much family fighting and just all kinds of heartache.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was shortly after law school, and I've been doing it ever since, and it's been 10 years now.
Awesome. And how long have you been on your own for those 10 years?
Most of the time. So graduated in a tough job market and didn't immediately find something that I really wanted to do. I was working a few different jobs and volunteering at the courts, and kind of got frustrated with that. So decided to start my practice about a year after I graduated. And since then, I've had my own practice for most of those 9 or 10 years, with a few exceptions. So I worked for a big firm for about a year that did all kinds of law, and then I worked for a small estate planning and probate law firm for about a year and a half, and learned a ton at both of those, but I went back on my own, and yeah, so most of the time I've been doing that.
Awesome. And then you talk about the planning and everything. When should someone start doing their trust? And this is, by the way, California law.
Yes. Yeah. So
just disclaimer.
There are similarities and differences in every state. What I do is part state law and part federal law. But in general, if you're 18 or over, you should have something in place. Estate planning and trust have this like sound of like, oh, that's for really rich people that need like planning, right? But pretty much everyone needs some amount. Like, you need appropriate planning for your stage in life and your financial situation. So at least once you're 18, a healthcare directive, with a lawyer or for free, it's just important to know your healthcare wishes and appoint someone to help you out if you're ever really sick. So that's, I think, kind of the most important starting point. And then some things that are important to consider, like if you own real estate, it's a really good idea to have an estate plan in place, and in California, probably a trust. If you have kids, there are a lot of important things that come into it. whether or not you have assets, you probably have ideas about who should take care of your kids if you can't. That's a really important thing to a lot of my clients. And then, of course, as you acquire more assets, there may be more complex planning that's beneficial for tax planning. And as you know, there's kind of taxable and non-taxable estates. I focus on non-taxable estates, which means at this point, like less than about 11 million per person in assets. So most of us have non-taxable estates. Which means it's easier to get the results that we want. You don't have to do all this complex, like high-end tax planning to get really good results. So almost everyone needs some kind of planning, but those are some of the things that make you think like it's a good time. So real estate, having kids, getting divorced is a really good reason, especially if you have kids with your ex, to make sure that like your ex isn't the default to manage. Like if you leave assets to your kids, who do you want to manage those assets for your kids? At any time you want to decide what happens to your assets, to your kids, to your family members, is a good time to do some kind of planning.
Okay. And then say you start your like estate planning early in life. How often do you have to update it? Or if you don't update it, what happens?
Yeah, really good question. Definitely a good idea to revisit periodically. I'd say ideally like once a year, but at least every 2 or 3 years, just look at who you've named is the most important thing. Like what's changed in your life? Are the people you've listed still the people that you most trust to take care of you and your assets and your kids? And there are likely to be some big changes in the law coming in the next few years. So that'll be another thing to just check in. Like if you've worked with me, I'm happy to just take a look. And if you haven't, like, let's talk about what do these changes mean for you. So every few years, check in, just make sure it still represents your wishes. And if you don't update things and things have changed, the biggest thing is like the people you've named, we want you to have a choice in who's in charge of things if you're not there, right? And if that's no longer what you want to make sure to change that so that, you know, your best friend from 3 years ago that you haven't talked to isn't named in everything, and then it's kind of awkward and they may or may not still want to do it. But I always name backups just in case, so that can also be a helpful way to deal with that.
And then what's the difference between a trust and a will?
I get that question a lot. So there are a lot of similarities in California, at least. Most people think like, oh, I need a will, and actually a trust is more likely to accomplish what we think of that way. Both wills and trusts allow you to say who inherits your assets, who should manage your estate if you pass away. But wills do not avoid probate court, which in California is a big thing. It's if you do not have a trust, the probate court will oversee the transfer of your assets to your heirs. And it's just a slow, expensive way to do it. So a trust is a way to avoid that. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more private. And a trust just gives you more control and options. You can decide that maybe you don't want your kids to have full control of their inheritance when they're 18. You can change that to age 30 if you have a trust, whereas a will, you have a lot less flexibility and control that way. So those are some of the biggest differences.
And then what happens if you die without one?
If you do not have a will or a trust in place and you die, then your closest living relative would have to petition the probate court and say, you know, this person died, here's the assets they have, I'm the closest living relative, I should be executor and handle everything. So the court would then go based on there's a default under the law that says here's the order of priority for family members that should be in charge of distributing your assets, handling all that stuff. And same thing for if you have kids who are under 18, there's also a default list of closest living blood relative that would be in charge. So it just comes down to that list of here's the first person we look at. Are they available? Are they not a convicted felon? Okay, then they might be in charge if they're willing. So sometimes it works out great, and sometimes it's not who you would pick at all. So much better for you to have a say in how all that works. So that's what estate planning is really about, is you choosing who inherits your assets, who helps you out if you're really sick, who takes care of your kids, and having control over what that looks like.
Awesome. And then so you now offer, like, what other services do you offer?
So I focus on creating wills and trusts, and also helping people if someone has passed away with either following what's written in the will or trust, or if they don't have that, and dealing with the probate court. And I've recently started offering a more budget-friendly way to do that. There's certainly a lot of advantages to working with a lawyer to set up your plan, but if you can't afford it, or it's just not in your financial plan right now, or even if you just really like doing that kind of thing yourself, I do offer now kind of a do-it-yourself estate plan. And I'd say the biggest difference is, like, what's the priority for you? Do you want to save money, or do you want to save time? If you work with me, I guide you through the whole thing. I direct, like, you tell me about yourself, and I say, okay, here's the documents that makes that happen. If you do it yourself, there's a lot more, like, research and understanding that you need to do yourself. And I started doing that in part because of the, financial accessibility. Not everyone is in a position to hire me one-on-one right now. And also the solutions that are out there for that type of thing, I see so many problems with them. They're, like, really oversimplified. I just see them filled out incorrectly all the time, and they're trying to be this oversimplified, but also over, like, one size fits all. You all get the same form. And what I see is that causes problems for everyone that fills it out, even, like, leaving your kids out of your estate plan when you plan to give everything to them. So I've developed this, like, do-it-yourself version that is more thorough than anything else I've seen, but also doesn't require you to be a lawyer to do it yourself. It's designed to be, like, if you are a single parent, you fill out this version, and then you can't accidentally not give everything to your kids, because that's, like, baked in. So if you're a single parent, you fill out this one. If you're married and don't have kids, you fill out this one, and then it reduces the amount of work you have to do and the possibility for error. So that's kind of my new thing in the last year, and trying to serve a wider variety of clients.
Awesome. And then if you decide to do or you get the
DIY.
DIY, okay, and then decide, like, whoa, this is too much for me, do you offer, like, can they come see you?
Yeah, so that's one of the advantages to doing all of that through me. If you purchase the DIY and decide, like you said, this is too much, or this is not, there's more here than I want to deal with and understand right now, you can upgrade and just pay the difference between the DIY price and the one-on-one price. And since there's not a lot of places where you can do either one with the same person, I think that's a good, like, fail safe. You're not just losing the money that you paid in the first place. Yeah.
And then where, like, exactly do you, like, you're located in San Carlos, but where do you cover?
Yeah, so we have a physical office in San Carlos, California, and we can serve clients all over California. You do need some legal ties to California, but both my in-person services and the DIY ones are aimed at California residents, or at least people with California legal needs. So you live here and or you have property here. Those are the most common things, but you can always ask me if you have questions about whether it's a good fit or not.
And speaking of different, like, property, what if you lived in another state, or you lived in California but you have property elsewhere? Do you have to do, like, a trust or will other states, or?
So that's actually an extra good reason to have a trust. If you own real estate in multiple states and you don't have a will or a trust and you pass away, then your family would have to deal with a probate court proceeding in each state where you own real estate. So if you set up a trust, it can get expensive and just a humongous hassle. You probably have to hire a lawyer in each state because they all have different rules, and, like, how do I deal with all this? So with a trust, you can set up a trust in whichever state that you live in, and then you can put your, California real estate, and if you, property in Nevada or wherever else, you put all of that in your California trust, and then there's no probate in any of those states, so it saves your family a humongous amount of work and cost.
And then, do you have any advice? Because trust, like, once you look at like the questionnaire, it's a lot. It's like your whole life, and you're gonna be gone when everything takes place. Like, any advice? Because sometimes you do see from the beginning and how it plays out with some of your clients. But like, do you have any advice for people that are going to start a trust, like to think about, to like avoid past problems or something?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is just to think, what is your priority right now? I will then bring in like, okay, what's the backup plan and the backup plan after that, and I can plan for the most obvious like what ifs, but try not to go too far down that rabbit hole. Don't get overwhelmed by the options and the, if this then that. Like, if something happened to you tomorrow, what would you want to have happen? Who would you want in charge? How would the assets go? And then, come back and think about it every year or two. And, the planning that I do can be changed. There's nothing like set in stone. So try not to get too overwhelmed of like, well, I don't know what's the perfect choice and I might change my mind. Like, it's okay to change your mind. You can change the documents, and anything that you have in place is going to be better than leaving a big mess with, like, if you think you don't know what you want or what the perfect situation is, so much worse if you don't have anything in place and you're kind of just leaving your family to pick up the pieces. So try not to like focus too much on making it perfect, and just get something in place, and it will help your family and you. Like, disability planning is a huge part of it too. It's like, if anything happens, you just want some kind of good quality documents in place.
And then just a quick question. A lot of times when you're at the doctor, you have to, or they ask you to fill out a healthcare directive. What happens if you have one in your trust? Does it, and then you sign this one because you maybe don't remember you had it?
Yeah.
Or you just, fill.
So a healthcare directive is definitely an important thing to have. It's part of what I do as a package for my clients, but it's separate from the trust. And if you had one and then you filled one out with your doctor's office, the new one would overrule the old one. So you do want to keep that in mind. If you have one, it's fine to sign a new one. Just be aware that you're overriding the old one. And regardless, you do want something like that on file, whether you do a custom one with me or fill out one with your doctor's office. Like, get something on file that you've carefully thought about who you would pick and signed properly. Sometimes when they ask you that, it's like kind of an emergency situation, or you're about to go in for surgery or something. So if you filled one out like that, revisit it, take a look at it, make sure it's still what you wanted, and not, sometimes there's changes when we look at it when we're not in a rush situation. So good way to revisit that too. And if you have one and your doctor doesn't have a copy, make sure to do that as well.
Yeah. And then, any advice to any lawyers or like people that want to go to law school?
If you're thinking about going to law school and you can like work in a law office in some capacity for a little while, I did that. So the brief period of time between deciding to go to law school, graduating, and then starting law school, I worked in a divorce law office for 6 months. Had an excellent boss. Realized I do not want to do divorce law, and I'm very glad there are people who do that, but that's not me. But it was just a great way to see kind of what it's like in a law office and what different things to think about, and talk to lawyers if you can. Most of us are pretty willing to talk to people about what we do, and offer to take one of us out to lunch or breakfast or something, and just kind of get a feel for is this what you want to do? And there's a lot of variety within the field, so explore that and just see what might be a good fit.
Cool. All right, so that is Marisa, law office of Marisa Nelson, where she's located out in San Carlos. I'll link all the information below. So if you are in need of a estate plan, I highly recommend her. It's not just because I work for her, but she's amazing. All right, so let's talk more, or let's review the Prosecco. So what kind of wine drinker are you, just so they know?
I have a glass or two a few times a week.
Okay.
And, I I wouldn't say I know a lot about it, but I enjoy having a glass.
Awesome. And then, so what do you think about this wine?
I love this actually. So Prosecco is kind of a favorite of mine to begin with. I like a little bit of a sweeter wine, and this is perfect for me. It's sweet, very drinkable, not too dry, no kind of like weird flavors or anything. I could probably drink too much of this very easily.
It is pretty good. I like how it's not so dry in your throat.
Yeah, no, very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Summer, or any time of year.
Yeah. I wish I could justify it. Summer is good. I would have it in the winter too.
Yeah, totally would.
All right, there you have it. And then if you have any questions, just send a DM or a comment below. Thanks for joining me. Cheers.
Cheers.